Hey guys, okay, working on this 1987 Ski-Doo Safari here. It's got the 377 motor in it. Pretty common for snowmobiles of this era, the Ski-Doo snowmobiles. And I was having a little bit of an ignition issue with this thing. Anyway, it ended up being I had a bad spark plug. And they were very new spark plugs. They're only about a month old, but one had failed. So I figured I'd make a video on just testing the spark plugs on these, testing the ignition coil, and seeing if it also could be the CDI unit of this machine that could be causing your problem. So what I had was one cylinder was running fine, the other cylinder was running sort of sporadically or not at all. And the way you could tell that is I pulled the spark plug off of one and it would still run fine. And then I pulled the spark plug off the other and it wouldn't run at all. So the one I was pulling off was obviously the one working, and then the other one wasn't able to keep it going. So like I said, I figured out it was just a bad spark plug, but you could test the spark plugs if you don't have a new set. Honestly, the best way is just to get a brand new set and maybe just get a couple of them. Well, get 4, because the chances of 4 brand new spark plugs being bad is pretty slim, so that's a good way of ruling it out. But I just wanted to show you with a simple multimeter set to ohms here how you can test your spark plugs. So let me just set this up so you can see it, hopefully. So that should be good there. Okay, so I've got the 2 spark plugs here. Now I just had them in my hand. I don't know which actually one is good or bad, but so a couple things you can check here. So go from the end. So basically the end is connected to this tip, not this part here, but this little round tip here. And it's insulated from every other part of this thing, the body and the tip here and all that. And so you want to get your ohm reading from this to the top of that tip. And I'm getting 4.96 kilo ohms, which isn't bad. Anything between 5 and 15 kilo ohms on these type of spark plugs is usually fine. Small engine type spark plugs with the R. R means there's a resistor inside. So let's check the other one here. Oh. Okay, so this one, put the lead on the end here. And it's got 5.10 kilo ohms, so 5.1 thousand ohms, which isn't bad. Okay, so another thing you can check is the resistance, or there should be no resistance basically, between this and the body of the spark plug. If there is a connection basically between this and the body of the spark plug, it means something's grounding out, which means your spark won't reach this tip right here. So I'm just going to touch this, and I'm not getting anything. And then we'll go to this one here, put it on the tip, touch the body, and we're there we go. We're getting 29 kilo ohms. So there is resistance in this, which means it is connected, which means this is our bad spark plug. So the spark plug was trying to fire, but some of the power is dissipating out through the body of this thing and not making it jump between the tip here. Now, another thing, the gap on these is 0.016. So you just got to make sure they're gapped properly. So replace your spark plugs. If you find out your spark plugs are good and you're still getting misfire in your cylinders, next thing you can check is the coil. So on these machines, I guess I'll quickly just explain in the simplest way I think I can how this ignition system works. So the engine basically turns a magneto, which is like a cup-shaped device, and it spins over top of a stator. So a stator has a whole bunch of magnets on it, and the magneto spins over top of the stator, and as it does that, it creates alternating current, and the stator sends that through a wire to your CDI, which is your capacitive discharge ignition box. And that's the little black box that sits on the back of your engine. So it sends an AC current to that. And then what happens there is basically your CDI box, it has a couple of different functions inside, or a couple different pieces inside of it, but it's an electronic ignition basically. It replaced the points and condenser type ignition systems, which obviously are prone to wearing. So the AC power enters the CDI box through a diode. A diode is basically just like a one-way gate valve for electricity or electrons, and it starts to charge up a capacitor. A capacitor is sort of like a battery almost, but it's like a fast battery. It can charge and discharge quite quickly. So it starts to charge this capacitor as the magneto is spinning around the stator and creating that AC current. It keeps charging, and then on that same magneto, there's one spot on it where when that one spot comes around and it goes past your pickup coil, it's called, it's just basically a little device that's picking up the location of that little tab. It sends a signal with another wire to your CDI box telling the capacitor basically to discharge that energy, and it discharges that energy into your ignition coil. Your ignition coil takes that energy, ups the voltage considerably, enough that it basically fires your spark plug. So it ups the voltage, acts like a transformer that would feed your house but in reverse. So it's upping voltage and it's feeding your spark plugs to fire your cylinders. So hopefully that explains what's kind of going on basically. So what you want to do is check your coil here. It's got primary windings and secondary windings in it. That's how it steps up the voltage. But you can check those coils for resistance, or windings for resistance, to see if they're good or bad. So we'll do that now. And what you can do here is you're going to pull these off, and you have to check the resistance with these off basically, because there'll be some resistance in these little caps that you don't want to mess with your reading. So I'll take these off. And then we're going to get our multimeter. Again, it's on ohms, and because it's 2-cylinder, we're going to put one terminal on here, one probe terminal on here, and we're going to see what we get. So we got 5.60 kilo ohms, so 5.6 thousand ohms, which is in the range for this engine, which is good. So for this engine here, I'm just reading this right out of the service manual. So for our secondary winding, spark plug cap removed, we should have between 3.85 and 7.15 thousand ohms, which we do. So we know that the secondary winding inside this is okay. So we'll leave that disconnect for now. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna want to check the primary winding. And so you're just gonna want to disconnect. There's two wires coming out of your ignition coil. Don't look at these brown wires here. They're just grounds for the lighting circuit and everything like that. There's two wires coming out. These come directly from the CDI box with that energy I was telling you about. We're going to check the resistance on these. And we have, this will be a lot lower resistance. This is a whole different, because it's the primary coil. It's a lot. It'll be a lot less resistance. So we have 0.3 ohms on this one here. So we'll check the service manual. And so for your primary ignition or primary windings, you should have between 0.23 and 0.43. So this ignition coil is good. So no need to replace that if we had an issue with our ignition. So I'm just going to plug that back in. And so if you've eliminated the spark plugs are your problem, you've eliminated the coil being your problem, you can now move to your CDI box. So the CDI, honestly, the best way to check if it's bad is just to replace it with a new one. They're really easy to replace. It's just a plug and play type thing. It bolts to the back of your engine. They're not super expensive. It's good to have one on hand if you have a couple of these sleds or even one of these sleds. So you can rule that out immediately. There are ways to check it with a multimeter. You basically take it, it's easier to do it with it out of the machine, but you go from the ground terminal on it to the various other terminals to see if there's any continuity. If there is continuity, it is usually bad. So that's one way of checking it. If you've ruled out that your CDI box is not what's causing your ignition issue, then you got to get it a little bit more in depth and get into your stator, your magneto, pickup coil. The pickup coil may not be sending the signal to your CDI, telling the engine to fire. But but to be honest with you, a lot of times it isn't that. It's going to be your spark plugs first, I would say. Second is going to be your coil, and third will be your CDI. I'm sure there'll be a lot of guys that disagree on that, but in my experience, that's been the case. So yeah, hope that just gives you a little bit of information on these ignition systems, guys. There's so much more to these that I haven't explained, but hopefully that's a little bit of, you know, the basics. Things you can check, you know, I'm just out here, you know, it's like -5, 10 today, something like that, and like I'm just outside checking this right here, not in the shop, anything fancy. So you can do this like in your yard or whatever, just to see if it is something basic and if it's something easy to fix. So if this video helped you out, please subscribe and give it a like. Thanks.